So as you can see, I've got an alignment stick through my belt loops because we're talking about the lower body and how the hips work in the backswing. So important. We have to work from the ground up. If the legs don't work well, the upper body isn't going to work well. So the first thing we need to discuss is the angle that the legs or the hips rotate on. If I was to take a normal golf stance but stand up dead straight and put the club out here, and if I could have a 6-foot tee with a ball on, then what would happen is as I rotate, my hips would turn and they would be level, horizontal with the ground. But the ball isn't there, the ball is on the ground. And because it's on the ground, straight away what you notice is that there's an angle through these hips. So the first thing we have to appreciate is the hips rotate or pivot on an angle. Now watch what happens as I do that again. Here's my standing up position, I turn back. Watch what happens to my knees when I tip over to the golf ball. Notice how they are now completely different in the flex that they have. This trail leg hardly got any flex. This lead leg, plenty of flex. So how do we get these hips turning on an angle? Well, it's two things. It's number one, having the setup where we're tilted over and the hips are tilted. No good if my hips are like this because they're not going to turn on angles. We have to have the hips tilted. And then secondly, it's allowing the knees to react to what the hips should do and having the knees change their flex in the backswing. Trail leg loses, lead leg increases. And if I'm practicing at home, I can get something like this, and if I could just stand opposite a reflection or a mirror where that camera would be, I can very, very clearly see that I've got that change in knee flex and I've got that angle through my hips. Now, unfortunately, we can't give you a specific angle because that would depend on how tall you are, the length of your clubs, the club that's in your hand, lots of variables, lots of factors. But if we can sort of understand that the hips are rotating on an angle and what your knees do is so important to allow that to happen. This would be, for me, the first little exercise. Trying to make a backswing pivot where we're using the knees and the hips correctly. So once we know how they turn, the next question might be, how much they turn? Well, again, unfortunately, it's going to be individual to you. Someone who is super flexible. You know, an athlete, for example, might need less hip rotation than someone who is a little older in life, maybe a little bit less flexible. They're going to need a little bit more hip rotation. A very simple exercise that you can do is to take a golf club across your shoulders, get yourself into a golf posture, and just try and get the grip of the club behind the golf ball with a pivot, and just allow the hips to move enough that you can achieve that position. You can see I need a relatively large amount of hip rotation. Now the other thing that's important here is when I get to this part of my backswing, which would class as the end of my backswing, I don't feel tight, I don't feel restricted, I don't feel like I've wound up and I've stretched my body ready to release it. And certainly when I was growing up, that was the instruction that I was told. I was almost told to stabilize the lower body, wind the upper body against it, and when you get to the end of your backswing, it should feel like you're wound up, ready to release in the downswing. Well, what you'll see when I do that is it tends to restrict movement. It tends to mean that I don't turn my shoulders fully, but what I have done is created some tension, which potentially is a good thing. What I would rather you do is have a little bit of a freer hip turn, which allows you to get a longer backswing. And then provided I can start my downswing with my lower body and I can have some shift and some rotation, what happens when I shift and rotate with my lower body? That's when I create that tension. So I go back and I create the tension by the sequence of events that I have in my downswing. When my lower body starts and it stretches away from my shoulders, that's when I create my power. So we don't need to be creating this super tight, wound up backswing, because for me, I don't see many golfers who can play that way. What I would rather you do is have enough rotation that allows you to get a nice full backswing with very little tension across the body. So you can do that at home. You can find out how much you need to move your hips to get you into that full backswing position. The next thing that we need the lower body to do is shift pressure. It's really important that we get that golf club energized. Shifting pressure is a great way to do that. Here's a little exercise. I've possibly done this before, but I love this. Absolutely brilliant. We can't see pressure, but this exercise is going to allow you to feel it. Take an address, take a 7-iron, hover the golf club. Forward by a foot, backwards by a foot. keep the club moving. Notice how I'm moving that with my chest, not my hands, not my arms, it's my chest that's rotating. As I do that at this speed, I do not feel any weight or pressure moving in my feet. But if I increase the speed of this, but don't increase the length that my club is going, as I start to increase the speed, I suddenly start to feel that my feet are having to do something with the ground. They're having to work a little bit harder for me to control that movement and make sure it doesn't go too far one way or the other. That's how I feel pressure. So what we can do is we can do that little exercise. We can build that speed. This is me shifting pressure. And then I can just at some point go into a backswing. And it's to tell you what, it's incredible how good that feels, because you really feel how is your backswing, you've shifted pressure. So in that little exercise, we've rotated, we're on an angle, and we've shifted pressure. That's perfect. There's nothing else that your hips need to do. They've done everything they need to do. It's perfect. So this is a great exercise. We start slow, we feel it. As soon as I start to feel that pressure shifting between the feet, I go ahead and make a backswing, and it really feels like I'm working into that trail side. Now the final thing that your hips are going to do is they need to stay relatively centered. Now I'm going to use an alignment stick for this. And we see two actually different models here, so I'm going to run you through both of them and you can figure out which one is going to be kind of suited to you. So I'm going to try and put that in the ground, and you just use that as a reference, and you can maybe take a little bit more time over this. If we were to put a reference on the outside of your lead thigh or lead hip, what we'd be looking for is the relationship between your hip and that alignment stick at setup. I would like to see that relationship the same when the club stops moving. Hopefully that relationship is the same. So in that little demonstration there, my lead hip stayed in its position relative to that alignment stick. It didn't move. That's what we see many great players do. There are some golfers, like a Rory McIlroy for example, who early in the swing will actually have a little bit of lateral shift. So you notice how I moved away from that alignment stick? And then as he rotates and he completes his backswing, he'll start to recenter and get back onto that alignment stick. So two different ways of doing it. The key point would be at the top of your golf swing, your lead hip and its relationship to this starting point here should be the same. That's really important, because it's that allows us then to do all the things on the downswing that we want to do. Shift pressure, move to our lead side, all of those things. So for me, the inside is your body, controls the outside, which is the golf club. If you want your upper body to work well, you've got to be looking at your lower body. So what we've covered in this video is lots of things that the hips should be doing, which are going to help with your backswing. So let's go ahead and see if I can actually demonstrate what I preach. So we're going to go turn, on an angle, shift pressure, stay centered. I mean, the shot was good and the strike was good. So with any luck, I ticked all those boxes. Get your hips working, definitely going to hit a better result.